Okay. 1, 2. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Hello. I welcome you here at camp, and I also like to welcome everybody that watches us online. My name is Nikita Polyakov, and I will be hosting tonight's Urban Talks. This is another of Urban Talks series, but this is a special one because we are following the Future Urban Habitat Conference, and we will be expanding today's conference into an interesting debate, which I hope you enjoyed today's conference. So, and those who are here after the whole long day, welcome, and I hope you find it interesting. As I learned today, Norway and the Czech Republic, in the housing sector at least, are similar in many ways. There is a large proportion of private apartments and self-catering apartments, and there is a small proportion of rentals. And there is no affordable housing policy, or has not been. And there is, and as we know from Prague, new approach is needed. We struggle with high prices of houses, of apartments. There is not enough apartments in this city, and we need to talk about it and experiment, and that's why we are here, to maybe listen to some insights and case studies that might be useful for our cases and for our city. And also, we will see which experiments actually might work. And we will find it with our Norwegian guests, who I will introduce in a short period of time. Before that, I would like to thank the organizer, which is Center for Central European Architecture, MOBA, and our partners, IPR Prague, which is where we are at the moment, CAMP, and Creative Europe, funded from Norway funds. And this event is also held under the patronage of the Czech Chamber of Architects. Guys, we will have 4 presentations. It will take around an hour, and there will be some 30 to 40-minute discussion. So please feel free to ask questions. We will definitely address them during our debate. And if you are online, you can use Slido. I think hashtag is #CampuiOnline. Just try the question, and we'll have time to address it as well. Okay, so we have 4 colleagues, and let's start with the first presentation. And it's Kathrine Standal, director of the Housing Foundation in Trondheim. She will present how housing policy works in Norway. Kathrine, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you for coming in and inviting us. I'm going to talk about affordable housing policies in Norway, and I put the topic on how is it working. Well, I'm going to spoiler alert. The housing policy in Norway works really, really well for the rich people and for old people, but not for young people and not for the working class. Because the housing policy in Norway, it's been, for 50 years, it's been 80% who owns their houses and 20% tenants. But the increased prices for buying an apartment or house, especially in the big cities, means that more and more people have to rent. And I guess this is quite similar to the situation here in Prague. And also, I can say that the housing policies in the districts is not working either, because it's too expensive to build new houses, and you don't get a mortgage for the price that it actually costs to build the house. Sorry. Yes. I'm just going to say this graph, the blue line is the year's salary, and the red line is the housing prices. So you can see the housing prices has been quite rising the last years, and the wages are not following. So, but the state has encouraged homeowners, and the tax system gives a lot of benefits to homeowners, but not to tenants. And homeowners receive subsidies from the state between 50 and 100 billion Norwegian kroner each year. You can double that, and then you will find the check in kroner. And the housing market is unregulated and market-driven. Those with the lowest incomes are excluded from the property market. And here you can see that the green line are all the housing, all the houses together, and the purple line is the low income. And so it's been falling down, and now I think it's 24% who are renting houses and 76% that are owning. So it's a quite big shift. So, is this a problem? But what are the consequences of this way of doing things? It's the biggest catalyst for inequality. The money goes from the poor to the rich, and from young people to old people. That is a problem. It's almost impossible to buy a house alone, and a friend of mine said that if you want to buy a house, you need to find a girlfriend or boyfriend. And if not, then you cannot. So if you want to live your life single or you don't find a partner, then you're out of the housing market. But it's also impossible to leave your partner because it's difficult to buy a house or an apartment that's big enough for you and your kids, for example. And I talked to this woman, she's a doctor, and she earns 800,000 Norwegian kroner, which is really high income in Norway. And she said, I want to leave my partner, but I cannot find anything in my neighborhood where the children go to the school, so I have to stay with him. So this is a big problem. Not that people should not stay together, but if you want to leave, you should be able to. And we have a very high household debt. And the debt has grown greater than the income over the past 20 years. And I think, actually, Norway, we're on the top in Europe of household debt. And this is all concerned to the housing market. So, if you can't buy, your option is to go to the rental market. And the rental market in Norway, this is the typical house you can rent, or flat you can rent. You rent it in the basement of the homeowner. And that works very well for a lot of people, but they also, it's a problem because they usually have a 3 months notice. So if you own a house and you're saying like, yes, we're renting out the flat in our basement, that's really nice. But now my child, she's a teenager, she wants to move in, people living in the flat has to move out, and they get a 3 months notice. So it's very unstable for people to live like that. And many people also have quite low, poor living conditions. If there was somebody who told me the other day that they had a lot of mold, black mold on their walls, because it's quite dense maybe in the basement. And the owner of the house said, well, just move then. So, and this is also, it's an unbalanced power relationship, because it's really difficult to go to the homeowner to say, this is a problem in my flat. Because then the homeowner will say, yeah, just move. This is not my problem. I will find a new people to move in, because a lot of people need housing. So, also 30% then is run by professional rental companies. But the rental market is profit-driven and values accumulate in a few companies. And ideal rental or non-profit rental is almost non-existent. This is Tollefsen, the Norwegian guy who owns Heimstaden, that I was told earlier today, has bought up many, many flats here in Prague. We're not very, or most of us don't think that his business idea is really good, but it says has made 8 billion on rental in 2 years. Which means that the poorest people are actually paying a lot of rent and giving a lot of money to people who are very rich. This is a big problem, I think. But there are hope. I hope this will change soon. Because I have invented a new word in Norway. because in Norway we talk a lot about the third housing sector. The third housing sector is, you say the first housing sector is the private owned. The second is the social housing that the municipality gives. And then you have the third housing sector, which is everybody in between. And in Oslo, they have, the municipality in Oslo have said that, no, this is the third housing sector, it's the people in between. But the EU definition of the third housing sector is non-profit housing sector. And it could be owned or it could be rented, but it's non-profit. So I was quite frustrated because I'm in a lot of discussions with the municipality, and they are saying like, yeah, we don't understand what the third housing sector is. So we have to figure this out. And they have used 2 years to figure this out. And every time I say, yeah, but there's an EU definition of what a third housing sector is, they're like, no, but we don't understand what that means for Trondheim, where we live. So I said, okay, I'm going to give this new name, allmennbolig, which means all people's housing. And I think this is the answer, or one of the answers. And that is realized through foundations. And foundations are, you have a foundations in a lot of countries, but they are owned by their purpose. And by drawing up good articles of association, you can ensure that the foundation fulfill important social tasks, like giving people a long-term safe home. And I also think we should distinguish between housing and homes. Because a housing, or it could be a room in a hospice, it could be a hotel room, but it's not a home. A home is something different. Housing foundations are non-profit, which means that everything goes back to realizing the purpose of the foundations. So nobody's making any money from the housing foundation or from the rent. It could just go back to realizing the purpose. We are designed to last forever, and which means that I'm a CEO of a housing foundation in Trondheim. When we build something, or when we do something, we do it with quality, long-term sustainability, and stability. That is important for us, because we're going to keep this house forever, which means I'm going to choose good things, and I'm going to give people indefinite leasing contract. Yes. So what are the benefits of having an affordable housing policy? Children are not removable, which means you cannot move a child to anywhere. They need stability. And we give them that. But the rental market in Norway is not that, and not in a social housing either. Because if you rent from the municipality, if you're in such a low income and you're struggling to get an apartment, you can get an apartment from the municipality. But they give you a 3 years lease. And then you have to check, are you still poor? Are you still struggling on the housing market? Okay, then you can get a new 3-year contract. But for children, this is a big problem. One resident living in Norway, he moved from Sudan and came as a refugee to Norway. He moved into an apartment of us. He said that knowing that we won't be kicked out or have to move in a couple of years is the most important thing. Without a safe place to live, it's impossible to feel belonging. This is the first time that he could paint his apartment. It's the first time that he had a home when he moved into our housing association or a foundation, which is really, really important if we want to think about the society as a whole. So what is the benefit of having an affordable housing policy? And also residential democracy. Because I think, and I really strongly believe, that you have to let the residents have a say in deciding their own tenancy and living in an environment. I think housing stability provides an increased quality of life. Affordable housing provides surplus to participate in the local environment. If you know you're going to live somewhere, you're suddenly interested in investing in your local environment. You give them a community that prevents alienation and loneliness. And I read the other day that loneliness, you can get diabetes of being lonely. So everything is connected to everything, and everything, I think, starts with housing. And by being able to be active agents in their community, they avoid learned helplessness and clientification. And this is going to save the society and everybody for a lot of money. So, it benefits us all. So, I think that low rents, participation, and close neighborly relationships provide a better quality of life and freedom. And this was one of the residents who said that. And I think also we need to know that in the human rights, housing is a right. And everybody has the right to a healthy, big enough, and affordable housing. And it's a part of the human rights, and I think that we have to implement them and take that serious. So, I'm going to say thank you. Yes.
Great. Thank you very much for framing the topic. Let's move on, and let's move to Oda Solberg, who will talk about the organization Natural State, which specializes in the sustainable economy in the context of urban planning. Oda, please. I think, yeah, your time is up here. And here's the clicker.
So, this is me. I am an educated architect, and I work together with Arild for 6 years. And we made a lot of pilot projects, which Arild is going to tell more about later. So that's the practice part I've been part of. And then I moved to the municipality of Oslo, where I was head of a project called New Housing Qualities, which was a research project, but also looking at how the municipality could provide for new housing qualities for ID-based housing sector. Now I work at Natural State, which is a strategy company, and we recently made this strategy, for instance, for the municipality of Lom, which is a rural place, and how to build housing in a place where the market cannot build and sell with profit. I'm also the head of the Co-Building Groups Association that Arild and me started together, which is the kind of the same as the Baugruppen, as you know, from Germany and other places. So what do we mean with this ID-based housing sector? In the municipality of Oslo, we defined it as collective housing, self-build, and the urban eco-villages. I'm going to talk about Norwegian examples and a few others from Scandinavia, from Sweden and Denmark. So first we start with this collective housing. This is from Trondheim. It's Teknobyen. It's the largest collective in Norway. 118 students sharing the same kitchen. A collective we define as people sharing primary functions like kitchen, bathroom, stuff like that. This is a very newly built project in Saltbrygga in Larvik. This is rental for elderly, and it's serviced. So there is a person, a receptionist, that the people live there can say, we want to arrange a dinner, can you help us with that? And she does that. But the builder, it's a commercial project, but the builder said the limit should be that you can rent here by your own income as a pensioner. And of course, it would have been harder to do this in Oslo and in Prague, but in Larvik, this works. Here it's kind of a collective on the neighborhood level. This is a refurbished old villa in a transformation project that lies among all these newly built buildings in Ensjø in Oslo. And the developer got an appointment with a non-profit, like the City Church Mission, who runs this place as a neighborhood house. So that's kind of the different levels. You have the serviced housing, you have the sharing of primary functions, and sharing on neighborhood level. And here is an example of the co-housing. This is from Denmark. In Norway, we don't have the same tradition for co-housing as in Denmark. In Denmark, they also have this, they make dinner together every day, which is rarely done in Norway. But this is a co-housing, but it's also co-building, because this was a group of 50 households that got together and found the plot, got a deal with the municipality, hired contractors together, and got this place built. And here you see from the common kitchen. This is another example from co-housing from Norway. And this is Sigi Rebirth Fund that thought it's just as a good investment, investing in a property and building a house. And they have the view that over 50 years they would earn on this. And they also are renting it out below market price. But since they see the economy in a long perspective, it works in the end. Yeah, and the Helgetun is also connected to this kindergarten and housing for disabled people. The later years, there has been built a lot of co-housing for small groups of disabled persons, from 6 to 12 people. And this is, before it was only municipal housing, but now they started to have collaborations with developers. So this is from one of the common rooms, from one of these small co-housing. Here is another example of an affordable housing. This is funded by we have a house bank in Norway where you can apply for cheaper loans. And this is the first homes, so it's directed, you have to be under 35 to be able to live here. It's quite a small apartment. And there was also this church that had the ground. That's why it happened, because they had this house to the right, the White House. It was an existing building, and they thought, can we make more out of this property? Here is an example about like the raw buildings. This is a purely commercial actor who wanted to have an experimental housing. And it was sold below market price because you had to you had to finish the apartment yourself. But then you could also make the layout, and it was constructed so you didn't have to apply. So you see, it was 2 floors, but the construction was already there. And people were actually sleeping in sleeping bags to get one of these apartments. But still, it hasn't been repeated. And I think it's kind of strange. This is one of the most famous projects from Norway in the latest years. It's from Stavanger. It's a quite large co-housing, and it's an architect-initiated project. So the architect had this plot where the office was. And because they had this plot, they could get a developer on board because they had this asset. And the project started with designing the process. So there was a group of people already logged on and co-designed the building in the regulation phase. and also through the whole process with the interior and everything. This is a project, one of the only kind of co-building groups projects from Norway, the latest 20 years. It's a group of friends, seniors, that wanted to build together, and they asked the municipality, they looked at maps, can we have this plot? And this is more semi-urban. It's outside of one of the smaller cities in the east coast of Norway. And how they got to do this, they bought the plot together, and then they parceled it out, and they actually bought their own plot, and they built the common house together and hired the contractor together. So it was kind of the easy way out to build this small house. This is an example from Sweden. It's one of the first large Baugruppe projects in Sweden, and this is the day when they start building. It's over 50 households that built together. And how they got to do that was because the municipality actually wanted to provide a plot for this kind of project. Yeah, and this is from Denmark. This is one of the large pension funds who wanted to also have housing for elderly. Here the group came in quite late in the process, but still there was some participation. They had an interior architect, and they gathered all the people that wanted to rent. This is a rental. And they said, what kind of furniture do you want to bring from your old house? And some had a piano, some had an old drawer that was really beautiful. And instead of them arguing what was going to stand there, they had like a process of selecting those furniture. As for the eco village and eco housing, in Oslo we have a few quite small projects. And this is close to where I live. It's called the Enebakkveien. It's an old, it used to be Ungbo, like housing for young people. But they were evicted because the housing conditions were so bad. And then the municipality came back, but they hadn't moved out. They were still there. And so they, after a long process, they got to have an agreement that they could continue renting and be like a pilot project for urban eco village. Yeah, and you also have the rural eco village. This is a very interesting project from Roskilde in Denmark. A group of people bought an old, it's not a castle, but it's like a royal place. And they transformed the nearby villages and the stable. And there are like 150 grown-ups and 150 children living there with shared economy. So they make all decisions in consensus. And they have like 85% of their income goes to the community. And 15% is pocket money. And then they get everything, like food, a place to live, everything. Yeah, and this is a Norwegian example of an eco-village. There was also a group of people, like the fire souls, or what you say in English. And they got investors on board. It didn't went quite so well. It went bankrupt, but they had a good plan. And now the owners has changed, and they're back in business and have developed a lot of housing. And the last project is Svartlamoen, but I will give the word to the next one, because Gjermund is going to talk about Svartlamoen.
Thank you, Oda. Thank you for the case studies. Let's follow up with our third guest, architect Arild Eriksen, the founder of the Fragment Studio, which focuses on designing community housing. So I'll probably will talk more about Svartlamoen, Please, Aldred, come. The floor is yours. The clicker is yours as well. Here we go.
Thank you. I'm not going to talk about Svartlamoen, but I think Gjermund is going to talk about Svartlamoen. And yeah. So thank you for coming at the Friday evening. I'm not sure if I would get any Norwegians to come to an architecture lecture in a Friday evening. So I think you're spoiled here. You know? So I'm running an architecture office called Fragment, which is, we've been doing this. I was running Eriksen Sky Architects before this, and we've been just doing like fantasy projects for 12 years. And I think in a way, of course, we are doing a lot of other stuff as well, which I'm not going to talk about. But I think for these projects, it's everyone is, apart from one, is in progress some way or the other. And if it's not in progress, then it has typically been exhibited at the National Museum 5 times, and everyone loves it, but no one was really interested in sort of getting out of the way to make it happen or anything like that. So this is an example of other things we are doing. We are making a children's book about, Kathrine in our office is illustrating a children's book about picking wild weeds and fruits in public fruit trees in the city. So this is typically another example. But the image is about the multifunctional city, which is, I think, is the main reason why you want to do affordable housing in the city, is that you want to make a city where if you are washing the floors in an office building, you can travel for 10 minutes to your home. Not like in Oslo now, where you need to maybe go for 1 hour, maybe 1.5, because there is no affordable housing in the city. And I think this is, of course, this has a lot of more implications as well, because in Oslo, everyone who has a plot of land thinks that they are going to build housing. But there is existing industry, there is existing brownfields, and sometimes you need to think that people are going to live and work and create stuff. In Norway, sometime we're going to stop digging for oil, naturally. And if we are not going to dig for oil anymore, what are we going to do? So this is a long-term planning for a society that we want to exist. But if we are not stopping the accelerating housing prices and not creating an affordable housing sector, then of course we're not going to achieve it. And I'm not going to talk so much about this. This is Norway. This is the rural Norway. Is the kind of villages that we sort of had in the future, and it's pointless to talk about now. But this is a good point to talk about, because we had a really interesting and a kind of good third housing sector, which was the housing cooperative, which I think a lot of countries in Europe actually had. It was you sort of owned a share in housing cooperative, and it was a regulated price, and you were on a waiting list, and you got at the top of the waiting list, and you actually got a flat in this, and you paid a fixed amount of money for a very long time. At the point in the 80s, there was a deregulation of the housing prices, and after a few years, the finance market was also deregulated, and suddenly if you had a share in a housing cooperative, like this one in Oslo, then suddenly you could sell it at a market price. And that's where Norwegians became speculators. And after a while, of course, you get the interest rate, you get it back from the state, and there was all these kind of subsidies that preferred the owning sector of the housing market. So it means that the government has sort of gradually built a land of homeowners that are subsidized homeowners for an insane amount of money every year that could have gone to anything else than actually making people rich by owning a home. And also, this is just to prove my point about not to necessarily prove my point, but it's about the point that we used to be a city where people were working and living. And this is actually, it's a bit ridiculous because this is actually where we came from. This is where the oil adventure started, when actually the oil platforms were made in the city center of Oslo, and people could actually afford to work as a welder on an oil platform and live in the city center of Oslo. But now it's a big contrast, and I'm sure that you see it here as you see it in most other European towns, or cities, is that the artists, this is Borgen, this was a famous place where artists were having their studios and workshops in the harbor areas of Oslo. But during the years, Borgen was evicted. They tore down the building to store railway tracks for a railway transformation. It sounds a bit ridiculous, you know, like that one building that actually provided workspace for a number of artists was demolished for that reason. And then you make the opera, you make the National Museum, you make the Munch Museum. So all the institutions and all the new buildings that are made in Oslo city center in the harbor is actually to show arts that are sort of valued, that has a value and has a kind of exchange value, while the artists who create stuff are moving further and further out of the city, along actually also with the artists who also move outside of the city. There is a lot of empty buildings in Oslo. I'm sure it is empty buildings. We went around here yesterday. We walked around and had a really nice walk and saw these kind of passageways. And it was actually like when we passed a number of empty buildings. So I'm sure this is something which is in all of Europe. I was teaching for the International Bauausstellung in Thüringen in Germany, and it was like 60,000 empty buildings. It was palaces, it was anything. So there is no excuse for the government to actually take part in creating a third, like an affordable housing sector, because there is so much possibilities and space. We began in 2011. We made a publication where we acknowledged squatters as a kind of building conservationists. We said, okay, you are entering the building and you want to protect it. It's empty now, you want to protect it. And we did a series of interviews for a magazine called Pollen, which was a part of the Archiscience tour as well. And after that, the squatters, or like the former squatters of this area, got in touch and asked if we could develop a housing project together. And we actually made a housing project where we said, okay, you are the architects, we can draw it for you and you can make the choices. And they said, okay, let's have a CLT building. We could have we don't want bathrooms, we can have a public bath in the basement, and we can have kiosks to sell our craft, and we can have an eating room together and a shared kitchen. And so they actually created a project. This is the project that were exhibited so many times and really never happened. But we discovered that at the moment we just gave the power to the residents who wanted to make this, a lot of interesting things happened. Of course, that we took the honor for, like in kind of a way, you know, like we've sort of brought it further. But still, it was a really nice experience that sort of you give the power to people, and then suddenly they want actually they wanted a hammam in the basement. But these kind of punk people who was a bit skeptical about this, they wanted a public bath because they've seen it in Copenhagen in the Jägerborgsgate. Which I think is interesting to think. You don't need all that standard all the time. You can have a discussion on how you want to rehabilitate your city and what kind of cost level you want to put it on and what kind of qualities you want to have. I think now, especially in Norway, we are on a kind of one-way track of this kind of technical quality, and which also is very expensive also. And for Norway now, that's not a problem. But in 20 years, perhaps it's a completely different story. And this goes for many other projects as well. This is the Olmsundveien Eco Village, which is a funny project. We've been doing it for many, many years. It's a group of people who were squatting this house and got a deal with the municipality for a kind of an eternal lease. And the municipality, actually, the city council wants it. They want it to expand, but it's really never happening. I've been having coffee at the town hall like every month for half a year, discussing this with the director of the housing department, and it goes really, really slow. But it's also an example that this is a project where you want to include people of different sort of economic capabilities. Some of them would have a municipal housing, but others would sort of be able to perhaps even buy a housing. And we've been having a research project that says how large amount of this is a difficult translation, but if you would go to the municipality and get housing, that's a kind of disadvantaged people. Like people have drug problems, different, and we found a percentage, and we sort of put together this project that was able to facilitate a mixed-use community that has all these kind of different qualities. This is a drawing you made. Of course, we are architects. We made a kind of an innovative, self-built project like everyone else wants to do. But at the same time, there's a lot of things that you learn from this. And that's why I thought, was it Renate, her name was earlier, is that when you have these kind of people who wants to create bottom-up project and learn along the way and do stuff, there are so many things that you learn. So this is a research report about how people are able to participate in rehabilitation and working on protected building in the community. And now we just recently got a state housing grant for making a course series of how people can take out the windows, repairing them, putting them back again. All in the name of this kind of bottom-up, step-by-step refurbishing, not putting too high quality to make it impossible for people to live. Oda talked about the Enbakkveien 37. It's a similar project and just as interesting. The last years we had, I think one of the reasons that we are here is that in Oslo, at Tøyen, for instance, the people, it's a kind of a gentrification that has happened. It means that people who are in municipal housing with this kind of 3 years lease, is that if they earn too much money, or maybe even if their kids earn money in the summer, they suddenly earn too much money to stay there. So then they have to move some other place. But in Tøyen, it's not possible to find a place to live. So you have to move quite far outside of Oslo city center. And it means that only 20% of the children who start in Tøyen school finish. So that many children actually sort of moves to other places. And you can imagine what that does to a kind of a sports team or a neighborhood, or kids who lose their friends, they move too far away, which has been a big problem. And this is also, I mentioned earlier today, now, like 2 years ago, if you were a nurse and you had an income, which is quite a nice income in Norway, you could only buy 2.5% of the houses in Oslo. And this is called the nurse index. We were mentioning it a lot because it's a nice index. It's not very poor people. It's people who have a decent income, and now it's down to 1.8. And this is why we are talking so much about affordable housing for everyone, because there is so much sort of benefits from it. I'm just going to flip through all these kind of reports and all the kind of intentions from Oslo municipality, because what they actually want is that they don't want to subsidize. They want to, the whole strategy for the Oslo municipality has boiled down to this kind of idea that they're going to help people with quite normal incomes to access the housing market. So they also can be kind of housing speculants on the housing market. So they have not really been able to create an affordable housing sector, because a sector needs to be a sector. It cannot be just the first person who buy a house is getting rich. It has to be a sector. So it has to be like the Danish version, that you're actually, if you move, then it goes back to the foundation. Oh, this is... It was not meant to be like to have a photo of Hanna, which is like triumphant, because Hagegata is perhaps soon happening, but it's been talking about so many years. There's one building where the municipality has put all their kind of energy and ambitions into. We're going to create the third housing sector. We're going to co-create housing for all in this building. But then suddenly it's rent. They have all these other kind of schemes. Rent to own. Perhaps you own half of the flat and then you pay down the rest of it during the next 5 or 10 years. Is all these kind of other models. So what we have been doing the last years is that we've been working with different kind of experimental models. We've been doing the eco villages. We've been looking into what people actually are able to do and can sort of participate in. And we have always realized that this is not a very simple way to create a third housing sector in Oslo. And we've been not really interested in it either, because we've been interested in asking these kind of questions of how much participation can we actually manage to get? Could we actually get like the Bell Architekten is doing in Hamburg? It's not the most beautiful project, but still it's an amazing thing that you buy like a plot in a shelf and then you build yourself, and from a kind of a manual. Or maybe like Gjermund is going to talk about that. Svartlamoen has been hugely influential, not only in Norway, but in other parts of Europe as well, that people can actually build their own houses that they are going to rent to a price which is so incredibly low that it's almost like a tenth of what you build in Norway in general. And then you actually get to live for like 300 or like 500 euros a month or something like that. Imagine what that could do for you as like an artist or musician or whatever you want to do. And this is sort of and what we are kind of proud of, and this is the last slide, is that all these kind of projects, which I think is I'm encouraging you also here in Prague, and we've been sort of influenced by different German initiatives that is of course, after a while you are inventing and you are testing out different pilot projects. You are applying for money and you get some money. And this is a project we are doing. We are developing a circular wooden building for resident participation in sort of making the layout, and perhaps like the Bell Architekten project that you can also build some of it yourself. The main project is of course to make it that you can transform it after a while and all these kind of things. But all this comes from this idea that the residents can develop and participate, and we can have non-commercial bottom-up development of housing. And it also shows for us that the value isn't necessarily that we make 1,000 new houses. It's actually that we open up the fantasy and imagination, and people are inspired, and people maybe say that it's impossible, but still for us it's been a really good process. And I think that's what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Arild, for your insights. Interesting presentation. Last not least, politician Gjermund Gorset will share his experience of managing the experimental community, Svartlamoen. Please, the floor is yours. With the clicker.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. I'm not or am a part-time politician. I serve on the local council of Trondheim, but my full-time work is working as the CEO of the Housing Foundation of Svartlamoen, which I will talk about in this presentation. Firstly, what is Svartlamoen? Svartlamoen started in the 1990s. Formerly, the Housing Foundation, which I work for, started in 2001. But the project started with residents of Svartlamoen organizing against the municipality who wanted to demolish the area of Svartlamoen and wanted to build industry. So Svartlamoen was started on the fight against the local government against demolishing their homes and demolishing affordable housing. The fight ended with the foundations being created, my foundation, the Housing Foundation included, and also a very special regulation plan. I would say that Svartlamoen has the weirdest regulation plan, maybe in the whole of Europe. We're regulated as a urban ecological experimental area. And in urban ecological experimental area, it is that we're supposed to create solutions that show innovation and can create other projects and inspire other people to create projects that will build on that sustainability. So the reason why I'm here today is to communicate what we're doing, and hopefully you'll take inspiration and create some Svartlamoen of your own. We have around 350 adult tenants in Svartlamoen, around 100 to 150 children also living on our apartments. Most of our apartments are pretty small. They're from 35 to 50 square meters apartments. And we have some larger collectives. The principles of our eco-community is that we are a mixed-use area. We have a lot of different purposes for our buildings. We have everything from bars to places that people can engage in activities. We're a self-grown area. We like to think that we build everything based on what our inhabitants want. It's an autonomy-based area, which means that we always build our processes from the ground up and from what the residents want. The urban ecology principles is using the existing buildings, not demolishing and building new, but reusing building materials and building parts, keeping old building traditions, using natural ventilation, having a low consumption per person, and a high degree of reuse. We never throw anything that we can use on our buildings. The task was laid in the purpose of the Housing Foundation when the municipality created the Housing Foundation. The purpose of the foundation is to develop sustainable solutions when it comes to environment on every level: ecological, social, cultural, administrative, residential, historical, and when it comes to citizens' participation. The overarching goal for the project at Svartlamoen is for become an alternative district with plenty of room for experimentation, trials, and testing. This applies to housing, living arrangements, social interaction, participation, ecology, and energy. Municipal service, and art and culture and business development. The homes must be preserved and improved in a gentle way and with as low cost as possible. The standard will thus be different than in other residential areas. New homes must be space and energy efficient, and flexible dynamic solutions are tested. The focus is on shared solutions, including shared bathhouses for the existing homes and shared laundry for all the homes. So sharing solution has always been a part of the project, and this was the municipality's sort of start of the project. The aim is to renovate the buildings that the municipality owns through either the rental income or through the citizens' participation. So I, that work in the Housing Foundation, I rent the homes from the municipality, and then I rent it out to the tenants of Svartlamoen. So that's the task. This was the original buildings of Svartlamoen. This picture is taken in around the 1960s. So that was sort of the task to renovate these houses. So the statement I wanted to discuss or look at today is, at Svartlamoen, people invest time and money in apartments that the municipality owns. Why? Is the question. So if I try to answer it, the first answer is that it is a lasting project. We have long contracts and we have political support for the project. And the project is completely based on the residents' idea. It's not a separate power coming in saying what they want from the project. The project was based on what the citizens of Svartlamoen wanted to do. On Thursday, we're getting a 35-year new contract with the municipality. So we know that we're going to last at least another 35 years. The second thing is autonomy. The residents, they organize in a resident organization. They have a meeting for all residents every month. And the residents elect 2 representatives to my board. The municipality appoints 3 members of the board. So the residents does have a power of how their landlord is running the business. This gives residents power and ensures that the foundation is treating the citizens of Svartlamoen fairly. I wanted to talk about this project. I showed it kind of in the last slide, but this is the experimental housing that we have built. So this project started in 2013, and it was a self-built project, as Arild was talking about. And it was 5 family apartments that were created using reused materials. So the total cost for the project ended up at 3 million Norwegian kroner, about 6-7 million Czech kroner. So it's a way to build cheaply, and that was one of the tasks. And the other task was to try to be innovative with reusable building materials. But it created a very important part of Svartlamoen, and these residents are very active, and they know how to build a house, so they also know how to help out on other houses and be a part of the community of Svartlamoen. So we are the owners of the buildings, and they built it for us, and then they rent the buildings back from us, which is a very special and a very good model. So I also wanted to show 2 other projects. So to the right here, we have one of the first projects that was done on Svartlamoen. So we have this cross-laminated timber project, which was one of the tallest cross-laminated timber projects in Norway until pretty recently. Europe, maybe we can extend that, but it's a very, very good and very creative project, and shows how alternative architecture and human-based architecture can really provide something else to a city. And then we also have a project called Selbukassa, and it's a project that was based on a house that we got for free from a farmer away outside the city of Trondheim, and he wanted to demolish it. So Svartlamoen took it and took it apart, and then made that house also on a self-building model with 4 families participating in the project. So that's some other building projects we have done, the sort of extreme version of participating in a way. So participation. The citizens organization have a flat structure. They don't have a leader. They meet every month in these community meetings with all the residents. They're they're based on consensus, so they have to agree on everything. which is not always easy, but makes for pretty good decisions that work for the whole community. They have long-lasting processes, but they usually end up with very great solutions that work for everybody. And there's also always a challenge between flat structure organizations meeting hierarchical organizations. But I think that Svartlamoen is a very interesting contribution in showing how flat structure organization can work as a model. And also, we used to, sort of think of ourselves in the top of this chart, in citizens' control or delegated power, in the top of participation. Most participation will happen in the lower part, in manipulation or maybe informing, but not actually giving away power to people. So what characterizes good participation in our experience? The outcome is not predetermined. That means that when you go in and make a good process with participation, you can't already know what you want to do, you just want consensus on it. It's to start early in the process, as early as possible, before all the ideas and groundwork are done. That everyone's opinion has equal value. Nobody is more important than anybody else. And sufficient information is provided. Information is one of the very usual parts that are held back in involvement processes. All sides of the case has to be shown. It needs to be, we also, in our experience, it needs to be a clear fixed line between what is fixed and what is not. So a fixed part could, for example, be the economy of the project. If you go into a project and you say, okay, we have 3 million kroner, this is what you have to use, then the economy is fixed. There's no participation in the economy. Then it's fixed. But you have to be clear about that. You can't lie and say, oh, every idea is a good idea. Just, oh, it cost 100 million kroner, no worries. Because then it's not real participation. And participation processes take time. Using people will take time. People won't have that as a full-time job. So people will have to have the time to process and to think about the idea and to be involved in the idea. The third reason why people want to participate with their money and their labor in Svartlamoen is that we're a closed economy. As Kathrine was talking about, the Housing Foundation is a non-profit organization. We're a closed-off economy from the municipality, and the foundation's only source of income is the rental income. Nobody can profit from the organization. Nobody owns the organization. I can't make even a too high salary before the Norwegian government will intervene. So that means that the foundation law is pretty strict, but it creates a very good non-profit organization. And also, low rents let people have the time to do other projects than just to work and pay bills. Low rents makes the possibility for participation, makes the possibility to have more time in their day to be a part of the community. So I wanted to show what is the result of this. And here we have one of our buildings in the 90s and one of our buildings today. And you can show how much of the renovation that has happened on this building is, we're very proud of it. And this has all been done either by the residents or with the residents' money. So it shows how a project like this can be done on demolishable buildings and how this can be a positive economic input to a government. This is also a picture of the residents renovating. So we have created great affordable homes for low-income residents, for artists, for immigrants, for young people, for families, and so forth. But if you want to put it in economic terms, we can say that we have created over 100 million kroners in value added to the buildings over 20 years, which is added to the fortune of the municipality. So that is the gift to the society. That's 236 million in kroner. So I will end it at there. Svartlamoen, Norway's first urban ecological experimental area. You're all very welcome to visit. If you happen to be in Trondheim, I will gladly take you in. Thank you.
Thank you, Gjermund. Guys, I think now time to have a little debate. So you're welcome to sit here. And I'm going to sit next to you. There are 4 microphones, so you can take each. And guys, I haven't seen questions on Slido, but I hope you're going to ask them. Feel free to ask them at Slido. Hashtag is Kempui Online. So if you have any question, just put it in. You don't need clicker anymore, so I'll sit next to you. And a general question just to warm up. You presented a wide framework of how the housing market works in Norway. Then you showed some case studies. From what I understand, the housing or the regulation or affordable housing approach is not sufficient in Norway yet. So what are you dealing with at the moment? Because all the nice case studies seemed like it's like the islands and the whole system. So probably the housing market needs some structural change. Can you maybe explain on what's going on in your country in these terms, and what needs to be done maybe in order to succeed in such transformation? Ladies first.
I think the problem in Norway is that we have such a high percentage of people who are owning their own houses, and this is the middle and upper classes that own their houses, and the people who are not owning their houses are poor or working class. So I think this is a class question. And I do think that a lot of people who are in power are making policies from the middle class to the middle class. And therefore, I don't think that a lot of people understand the gravity of how difficult it is to be in the rental market. And I think that is one, at least is how I see it, I think that's one of the biggest issues. We need to get more information, and we need to get the voices of the people who are on the renting market to be heard. And I think that also for a lot of the politicians, these are people who are usually not maybe they're not being used to be heard. Their voices are not as loud as the middle class or the upper classes or the rich people, and therefore they're not maybe that important when it comes to who is going to vote on them. And therefore, I think a lot of the problems are there, and I think it's our duty to raise these issues and to help people to get their voices, and also being their voices when they can't have them themselves.
Thank you. Oda?
Yeah, like you said, the case studies from Norway are islands, or they happened despite of instead of because of. So I think there is a lot of things the municipalities and the state could do to provide for these kind of things. And there is a lot that if you organize, you can do it as well. So we maybe need some legislations that we see in other countries, especially for the affordable housing. But it's also a matter of providing information, land. As Arild talked about, the woman who was in the first session, that said we have to learn everything from the beginning. So it's kind of a way to gather information and bring it to the next group of people that wants to make something. And that's why we founded this association for co-building. And we're planning to have a course it's probably going to be a lot of architects, but also other professions, to learn how to deal with these groups from the economy to the building phase and to the kind of how to get the groups to work together. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Guys, third sector housing. So the politicians don't understand what it means. So what does it mean? Is it affordable housing, and how can I afford it if I have no money? Is there some financing behind that? And actually, can this type of housing emerge when there are no money from either from the private sector or from banking sector? How to deal with this?
I think there is several ways that the government and municipalities can actually help to create the third housing sector. It's, of course, it would be incredibly interesting if the government actually helped creating like a complete third housing sector, or they sort of helped pushing in that direction. Like I sort of have the impression that Denmark is actually doing. But for Norway, I think everything from how you can actually lease land from the municipality. Most municipalities in Norway sell all public land. Of course, that's a big problem, because when they're going to build a kindergarten, they need to buy it at the market price back. So it's not a really good way to run a city. But for that, I think for us, what we are working with is to create a kind of a community. We were very influenced by Berlin and other like German and initiatives, and also like Swiss initiatives, where they, in a way, create the knowledge. They make meeting places. They sort of create a community that actually can manage to do this. Like a bit like Oda said, that we need to have the knowledge. We need to give courses. We need to do this because the real estate developers, they have these kind of meeting places, these conferences, everything. But from the bottom-up initiatives, we are so bad at organizing. And when the people in Germany actually manage to do this, is that they know what kind of organizations they want to make. They know how to finance it, Stiftung Trias and all the other kind of non kind of profit foundations in Berlin and other places. They actually see them and they manage to help them. In Denmark, Realdania is doing the same thing. So I think there is both structural changes from the government side that needs to be done, but I think we also need to take responsibility and organize and make it possible as a community as well. Because, of course, that's most fun as well, but I think we need to do it like that.
Oda, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, it's apparent that the market cannot fix this affordability themselves. So the government, in some level, has to have power, and they can either have power by the law, power by being a landowner, or power by providing money or subsidies. Guarantees. I think, or guarantees. That's kind of financial power. I think that's the three kind of parts.
Gjermund, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say that the market developers are constantly in Norway taking our words, and they are also now trying to coin the word third sector. And trying to sort of launch project that sounds like they're social sustainability, but in reality it's just profit-driven marketing. But they are trying to sort of seem like they're doing a social impact. So I think that defining what a third sector really is important. And Kathrine has coined this allmennbolig word, which is housing for all. Taken from the Danish solution. And I think that defining a third sector as non-profit renting apartment or affordable rent is kind of the way to go to try to battle the market-driven or profit-driven people that are trying to sort of steal our terms.
Arild? Oh, sorry, Kathrine, Arild. to you guys?
Yeah, I think if you're going to succeed in making a third housing sector, allmänbolig sector, it has to include everybody. You can't make just a housing sector for people who are in the working class or poor people. You have to also include the middle class, which gives people an option if they want to buy or if they want to rent, and you get mixed societies, which is really efficient for the economy, for a city or for a country to have. If you have cities that are very class divided, it's a really expensive city to maintain. So by saying that this third housing sector, allmänbolig, should also be for almost everybody, maybe not the higher classes, but the rich people don't want to mingle with us normal people. So anyways, but it's going to be for everybody else. I think that is maybe the key to actually get the broad, people, everybody on board on having a new way of thinking about housing policy. And I also think that maybe you have the same disease that we in Norwegian have, where we are taught that the only thing you could do in life is to get your own apartment. And when you get your own apartment, then you reach the goal in life, and then you have the gold ticket, and you're getting more and more money of your apartment, and by living there, and you're getting rich, which is just an idea, because you're selling and buying in the same market. So you're not getting rich; it's just a fictive fortune. But I think it's very easy to be a bit drawn into that way of thinking and that way of feeling. And I think we need to start talking about this more and talking about that this is not the only way of having a good life.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Arild or Gjermund, do you wanted to add up?
It was just a comment, because in Norway, there's, of course, there's structural change that needs to be done, but it's also the same. I'm in the board of the National Tenant Organization, with actually owning a house, but still I'm in the board. But what we meet in the society is that the big organizations for the housing developers, like NBBL and other things that probably doesn't mean so much to you, but they are coining the kind of terms that rental shame. It's like you should be ashamed if you rent a house, because then you have not succeeded. So there is this advertising campaigns. If you go to the metro in Norway, you will see renter shame. And I think that's a big part of a structural problem in Norway, is that you only succeed if you win the kind of housing lottery. Mm-hmm. And that's why we're trying to combat as well.
Guys, there are questions coming in via Slido. I'm going to address them because it's about a discussion with the people. In community, what do you do with people who do not participate? We are talking about high participation as one of the prerequisites to actually run such a community. Do you have problematic tenants, so to say, and how does a community deal with them?
The simple answer is yes, we have problematic tenants, but
everybody does.
Everybody does, and every sort of community will have that issue. But I think Svartlamoen has also its way of finding solutions to it, and also I think that Svartlamoen is made in a way which encourages participation so much that people will naturally sort of leave if they don't feel that they can't participate or be a healthy part of the community. You need to be sort of community driven, but it's also a sort of give and take society where you'll have people with health issues or people that can't participate for different reasons, and people who will participate more because they're in a position to do so. And people acknowledge that.
Can I vote you out, for example? So
no.
Okay, you've been bad neighbors, you can't live here
Norwegian
anymore.
housing, if Norwegian housing law allowed it, maybe we would do it. But no, as it is right now, we are obligated by Norwegian housing law to have the same rights for eviction.
Okay, there's the next question, maybe about all this tendency. So in the last 50 years, people were moving into the cities, right? So what happens now in Norway? Do people move out of the city because they cannot afford housing? So is there like this narrative shift of people just leaving Oslo, Oda?
It's a lot of people in my age getting children that has to leave the city because there's not enough big apartments and they're too expensive. So this creates a problem for the municipalities also nearby Oslo, because they have to build so many kindergartens, they can't afford to build so many kindergartens. So they have the opposite problem. So the city center wants to have a diverse population and have all ages, but they can't stay there, and the nearby communities says we can't take any more children. So both will benefit if the city is possible to live in for all ages and all types.
Arild?
But at the same time, the neighboring district towns of, for instance, Oslo, has over many years only built or allowed to develop housing apartment blocks with kind of apartments for elderly people who move from the single family house into this, and which is a bit, you know, like, it's strange because they also build schools at the same time, and the last kind of scandal is that one of the places is a place called Kolbotn. They built a like a children's school, which only had like a 50% like coverage, you know, like so they actually built a really big school for children that, because of all the flats for all the elderly people, wasn't even filled up. So this is of course the symptoms of a community that doesn't really plan its housing. It's for to the market and actually what's sold well the last 5 years, and then you build the same the next years. But it's a symptom for a housing market that should be directed and controlled.
Another question from the audience: whether you can develop these kinds of projects without the city municipality involvement. For example, we have a huge history of not trusting our governments. So. How do you approach this topic? Do you have to actually have a good relationship with your municipality in order to do it, and it's case by case situation?
I think you don't have, well, for us, my housing foundation, we're not dependent in many ways on the municipality. The municipality started us for like 50 years ago. They gave us 5,000 Czech kroners in 1972, and then because we're independent, we got loans from the different banks and the state bank, and then we have built up everything for ourselves. And therefore, I think you can have the housing foundation, which is not dependent on the municipality, but could be in a cooperation with the municipality, but also we can do things just by ourselves because we're just owned by the purpose of the foundation.
Thank you, Gjermund.
I'm just going to say that we are a foundation dependent on the municipality, and we rent our houses from the municipality. But for 20 years, we had a municipality that wanted to demolish the buildings and wanted to ruin the project. And we still do have major political parties in our municipality that want to end the project of Svartlamoen. So we're not non-controversial at all, and the only way we have survived is proving to the city and proving to the community of the whole city that we are of value to the city, and we are contributing with a cultural and ecological value for the rest of the society. So Svartlamoen was very much created against the mayor and the politicians' will.
Thank you. You want to, Arild, to add something?
No, I think there are several ways that that you can either work outside of the municipality or maybe in a kind of collaboration with them. It's like we do the artist housing for the Young Artist Society, and then the director for the urban development, he got in touch with a real estate developer and he said, can you talk to Arild because he is doing an artist housing and we want artist housing, and maybe you can talk to him because if you include an artist housing project, then we can discuss your development in another light, you know. Like, so it sounds very corrupt, but it's not necessarily corrupt, because then we will sort of help them to achieve a kind of a social mix or some other kind of goals. Perhaps they are allowed to build one floor at a certain part of this really big area, and of course they earn a lot of money, and maybe that money can go into giving the Young Artists Society that kind of plot of land. So I think there are different ways to do this without necessarily them giving a lot of money to the different foundations. And at the same time, you can also do like the C40, like the Reinventing Cities initiatives, that you are every year, like in Hamburg, every year they are putting out a piece of land that they are selling based on completely social criteria. Is that if you are a football coach in a local football team, it counts more than the 1 million Norwegian kroners that you put into the tender. So I think as long as you weight every kind of offer the same way, it can be social, it can be other kind of options, but still I think that's opportunities that is a bit outside of the subsidized realm.
Thank you. Let's move from Slido question to reality. There's a gentleman sitting in the back, so please, you have a question?
Yeah, first of all,
sorry.
Thank you for the presentations. My name is Pavel, I'm a social scientist. I was sitting here this morning, and I'd like to do the job that would be done much better by the people who are real experts on housing sitting here this morning, but they are not, I don't see them, so I will try to, fill their seat. I have a comment and a question. I'd like to bring in more like a local context of Prague, where we are. You're visiting now in the times shortly after municipality elections. And I only today found out that the progressives for 2 years in Prague were trying to build, and really they almost made it, the Baugruppe model for Prague. But shortly before the finish line, they were blocked by liberal Democrats with their own co-housing model, but basically with the model that would support and benefit developers in the back. So this law didn't pass, and we might not see it in the future at all. So I just wanted to tell you, we were really close to start piloting, start experimenting, but the things got stuck. And since right now, it's most likely we will have a more conservative, liberal, democratic government for next 4 years. And I'm really thankful to Kathrine. She brings this class struggle language into the game. And they represent the middle class. It's very likely this city is not going to cheerfully experiment with things that were so marvelously presented here. So the question is, I think, for us, all of us here, I mean, what are we going to do? Are we just going to sit and wait? If the politicians will just pretend the housing problem is not there, our beloved voters who actually own the houses, they don't feel the problem. They already own the houses, so why should we care at all? So would you have a commentary on this? And I mean, this is an invitation for all of us to think really hard and don't give up.
So what's your take on it? Thank you for the question, by the way.
I think you need to find the arguments. I often try to find the arguments for the different political parties for what I want to do and my vision of things. And I'm thinking, okay, because people are thinking, what's in it for me? And I think that if you look at society as a broad thing, if people are struggling with their housing accommodations, they are feeling a lot of psychological stress. What does psychological stress do with us? Well, it makes us not able or having the energy to go into the local community and be a participation in that. We have to look at, okay, what happens with children who has to move all the time? Well, they get dysfunctional adults many times because they lack the safety and security in their childhood, because they don't know where they're gonna almost wake up next morning because they're moving so many times. So this trying to take, I think, because I'm thinking a lot of times how I'm gonna pursue my neighbors. We're living in a middle class area. How I'm gonna make my neighbor who has no idea about housing policy think that it's a good idea to have a allmän boligsektor or affordable housing. Well, you have to find it, and that is because it's going to cost us all a lot of money if children are not living in stable conditions. It's causing a lot of money, people who have to move all the time or living in uncertainty, because their psychological stress is also affecting their body. So they're going to be more sick. Who's going to pay for the sick leave? It's going to be all of us. Well, at least it is in Norway. So that's what I try to do. I try to find the arguments that my conservative neighbor would actually approve on or could agree on. And then I use that and I try to put that into a context where housing policy is like the most important key.
Arild?
But I also think that of course this kind of sustainable development goals it's present in all kind of aspects of society now. But at the same time, when sometimes I get invited to speak to this kind of business owners association, and which is typically quite right wing in general. And then usually I talk about what kind of benefits you get from getting this kind of multifunctional city where people can afford to live and work, and where people walk past your shop and these kind of things. So I think in a way we have mostly focused on that we are solving problems, but usually I try to speak on about it in a positive way, that we are not focusing so much on the problems, that what you actually gain from creating the multifunctional city. Of course, you gain sustainability because you get the 10-minute city, and everyone who wants to sort of adhere to this kind of SDGs, you know, like they want to create the 10-minute city. So if you're a right wing or if you are a left wing, you want to make the 10-minute city, and there is no other way to create a 10-minute city than to provide affordable housing for everyone. And so I'm not sure. Of course, that's not that simple, because I think, but still, I think if you repeat it enough times and in enough different forums, I think eventually it makes sense also to the people who are at the right side of politicus.
Thank you, Gjermund.
Yeah, I think all us four panelists are trying to create sort of the power of examples, and the power of example is really huge. So even for Norway, it's kind of impossible to reference Denmark's social housing system because people will think that it's distance and it probably works in Denmark, won't work in Norway. So and the countries are quite similar, but the power of examples in a country and the power of examples in knowing somebody that works or lives or is a neighbor to affordable renting housing, to sort of be able to show it as an example and having it at the dinner table and being a part of the everyday conversation is a really, really important part of it. And then I also think using activism and finding different ways to be activists, that includes every sort of professions, from youths to architects to city planners to mayors to everybody, being part of being activistic and trying out new solutions and being in the forefront of wanting to find innovative housing solutions is a very important part of creating that way for a systematic social housing. But before that, you need that kind of power of examples, and that has to be led by activism. So go occupy a house on your way home, and then you'll have something to talk about and to inspire others.
Thank you. Oda, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, just very short. No matter which party or coalition that wins the current election, we might go into economic recession. And from history, both nonprofits and Baugruppen have proven them very good at actually building the housing needed also in recession, because of they don't need this profits element.
Thank you.
That's a good argument.
Ladies and gentlemen, anyone wants to ask anything? not last chance. Hopefully, there will be some space for networking. Well, guys, if there are no other questions, I would like to thank you very much. Thank you for coming and for sharing your experiences. Thanks again. And dear friends, I would like to thank Center for Central European Architecture MOBA, Hyper Prague, Camp, Creative Europe funded from Norway Funds. Thank for being able to organize this event, and also Czech Chamber of Architects, great thanks. And you can see this stream at Campuy online. Please be part of Urban Talks, and I hope to see you next time for another interesting debate. Thank you, have a nice evening, and bye-bye.